We are studying Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, where the Upanishad reveals to us through an introspective process the relationship of our mind with the Brahman, the divine consciousness. It shows the various powers that work in us, which make our life human, what we know it to be, are not powers which are original, but they are themselves secondary reflections of some still greater power. And the greater power is natural to the divine consciousness, the Brahman. That which is hearing of our hearing, mind of our mind, speech of our speech, that too is life of our life breath and sight of our sight. The wise are released beyond and they pass from this world and become immortal. So it is showing step by step a correspondence between each of our powers of consciousness with its higher original power in the Brahman. And as we awaken to that original source of our human capacities, we are released from the limitations of ignorance and share in the immortality of the divine consciousness. Amritam, which is not bound to limitation, decay, or death. And so the goal of the Upanishad is to lead us through an introspective process to rise through these very powers of our consciousness by tracing them back to their source, to rise all the way into the divine consciousness. First, we saw the step with the word, speech of our speech. That which is unexpressed by the word, that by which the word is expressed, know that to be the Brahman. And the second step is to view the mind itself. What is it that makes our mind capable of thought? And the verse goes, that which thinks not by the mind, that by which the mind is thought. Or there is a second meaning, that which one thinks not with the mind, that by which the mind is thought. When we dwell on this idea, know that to be the Brahman and not this. And so on with the sight, with the hearing, and with the life. And Sri Aurobindo takes up each of these in separate chapters to be dealt with. And his approach is at the same time to follow the intuitive, introspective process to attain to that realization, but to also satisfy the mind, the logical faculty, which otherwise doubts and questions each step. And at the same time, Sri Aurobindo also unites the modern materialist scientific discoveries with the deeper psychological and spiritual insights of the Vedic rishis. And we saw this in the previous chapter dealing with the divine word, that the principle on which the science of the mantra is based is not incompatible with the material understanding of sound and the creative power of sound, but it takes that into itself and yet goes beyond to a greater understanding. In the same way, the present chapter deals with this question of what is it that is mind of our mind? Is mind the highest power, or is there something behind that? What is the true nature of our humanity and the mental awareness. The chapter itself deals only with this question and brings through a logical, introspective, and intuitive process to the recognition that there is a greater power because mind is insufficient. And so the chapter is titled The Necessity of Supermind. The next chapter completes the discussion where mind and supermind are related and how one rises through mind, beyond mind to supermind, and how supermind leans down to use mind and even transforms mind into its own higher cognition. In the portion we read last time, Sri Aurobindo took up the ancient system of the Veda, which sees the soul not as a product of the body, which sees man itself as being primarily a mental being in a terrestrial body, the Manu. And therefore, if the body is dissolved, man will still persist. But if mental being is dissolved, then man ceases to be man, because our mentality is the focal point of our sense of humanity. On the contrary, he says, the theory of material evolution held by modern science sees man only as a product of matter which has developed mind through a series of experiences of sensory shocks. And we saw how logically Sri Aurobindo leads us to recognize that mind could not have evolved out of matter if there was not already behind or within matter some principle which organizes the response to the sensory shocks in order to form mind and to evolve mind out of matter. In the chemical elements which create the material form, we do not find this principle of organization. Therefore, he says, it is not in the form of matter that the principle of mind is hidden, but in the force which is at work in matter. And it is there we must seek the origin of mind. And we discussed this a little bit. We saw how even in the understanding of physical matter, we find matter does not behave by random chaotic processes, but it is governed by what we call laws of physics. The laws themselves, when we encapsulate them essentially, are mental principles, mental ideas. They are reduced into a mental formula. And that again shows that behind the material processes, behind matter itself, is the mental principle hidden, secretly guiding it. In the early discoveries of quantum physics, the scientists discovering that everything became chaotic on the surface, but was held behind by a principle, by a law, by a formula, which was purely mental. It led one of the great physicists to exclaim that we used to think of the universe as a gigantic machine, but increasingly it appears to be a gigantic thought. Because everything behind is held by this mental principle, hidden, secret in all the chaotic processes of chemicals and atoms. And this, Sri Aurobindo says, mind is then a concealed necessity which the subconscious holds in itself from the commencement of things. It is there right from the beginning, even from the point of the birth of the universe. It is the thing that must emerge once the attractions and repulsions of matter begin to be established. It is the suppressed secret and cause of the reactions of life in the metal, plant, and animal. And we discussed this last time through the experiments of Jagadish Chandra Bose, who showed that through metal, plant, and living tissue, there is the continuity of a single principle operating in exactly the same way. But Sri Aurobindo uses two phrases here: suppressed secret and cause of the reactions of life. And we understand clearly the cause of the reactions of life. When life reacts, it is this secret principle of mind which guides those reactions. When, for example, our finger touches something hot, we don't have time to think. There is an instinctive reaction, meaning at the level of the nervous system in the fingers and the hands, a decision is taken by the life force to pull the hand back. It knows exactly to pull back and not pull forward. It knows exactly which muscles to tighten and which to relax so that the hand will move as necessary to protect the life. The mind was not involved here. In that very instinct of the life force was an intelligence which knew exactly what to do. We find the same thing in very low levels of animal behavior, in the bacteria, in small insects, in the fly, which they say has barely 200 neurons in the brain. There is an intelligence which involves the ability to navigate precisely, to travel to a particular source of food and come back. Or in the bee, which is slightly more complex, to not only navigate great distances, to come back, and then to communicate to other bees exactly how to get there. For the other bees to understand a series of instructions and then apply those instructions to navigate and go precisely there several kilometers away. Navigating strong winds, mixes of all kinds of smells, all kinds of appearances of colors, and yet they know exactly how to get there. When we observe these instinctive tendencies of life, we cannot explain them purely by a biological machinery, neuronal brain communications. There is something else which operates, and we only name it instinct. How does the bee manage to do this? Instinct. How does the salmon, which is born in the ocean, travel back upstream to its original place? Instinct. But by putting a label on it, we have not explained it. We have only covered our ignorance. In life, there is not only a secret cause of the reactions of life, which is mind, but that mind is actually capable of knowledge which goes beyond the sensory apparatus of the life form. It can as if see beyond and know exactly where to go across thousands of kilometers when certain birds fly during their migration. And this mind is almost, we can say, universal in its capacity, although its expression is still very narrow in the operation of the reactions of life force. So the suppressed cause of the reactions of life, but it is also the suppressed secret of the reactions of life. And here comes a subtler insight. What is it that is suppressing this mind in the reactions of life? We find it is the nature of matter. The dullness, inertia, incapacity, the tendency of matter to reduce everything into purely mechanical movements, to bind them into what we have described as laws of physics. And so though there was a mind hidden behind in the very force which works through matter, yet matter is like a screen which has dulled and suppressed mind as well as life force. And so the emergence becomes slow, gradual, tentative, almost seeming to be through random chance. But through those processes of randomness, something very definite organizes and leads the journey. So it, that is mind, is the suppressed secret and cause of the reactions of life. It is the secret of the reactions of life behind suppressed, but also at the same time the cause in the overt emergence of life in metal, plant, and animal. The next paragraph is not what we take up now. He is developing the same idea, taking the conclusions of modern physics, however tentative they may be, and bringing them up to a deeper and higher understanding until they join with the Vedic conception of the role of mind, life, and matter. Now he continues the argument. We might say that it was not mind hidden inside the force which forms matter, but mind outside which guides the force. And these are two possibilities. And he will show eventually that the two join. But now we take up the second possibility. If, on the other hand, we say that mind, in some such secret and suppressed form, is not already existent in matter, we must then suppose that it exists outside matter and embraces it or enters into it. Either way, there had to have been the mind principle guiding matter, otherwise there could not be the emergence of the organized mind, and we saw why last time. So mind has to be either in the secret force behind or outside matter guiding. And there are two forms of that guidance. Being outside matter, it embraces matter or enters into it. And in fact, both things happen at the same time. There is, in the experience of consciousness of the universe, there is the experience of mind as a universal consciousness filling everything. In fact, life takes place in mind. Matter forms in life, which is also universal power. And mind itself is a special function in a larger universal consciousness, cosmic consciousness, which is supermind. So we have this idea, when we view these things within ourselves, that our life is somehow inside the body, because we see life only in the processes of the biology. And we think somehow mind is inside the body, inside the life, because we see mind only as a process of the brain. And soul, therefore, must be even inside that. But the mother said, no, that's not true. It's the very opposite. Soul is larger. Mind is inside soul. Life is inside mind. Body is inside life and inside the soul. So it seems to us strange because we view through the physical sensory machine and see only a very superficial material form. But if we removed the glasses of matter which dim our sight and saw directly, we would see the life energy is organized around the body. We call it the aura. We would see even the soul, when it is more developed, as a presence encircling even that. And body is formed inside these. So there is a truth that mind leans down from outside matter and embraces it. But also because it is at the same time filling all substance, it is also inside. It enters into the material processes and influences them. This is again and again demonstrated in the laboratory in various very strict tests. We are able to show that a strong force of the mind can influence material effects, can make a piece of metal become warm, it can speed up the growth of plant or tissue, or it can even influence things to move. In all these examples, if we observe carefully, the intervention has to take place at a level which is almost molecular or atomic, because all the other functions are not obviously changed. It is happening from inside matter, And mind as if enters inside and changes those processes. If you've ever seen a person bend a piece of metal, bend a spoon without touching it, simply looking at it or pointing to it, the only explanation we have is that something happens at a molecular level which weakens the molecular bonds momentarily and the metal simply bends. If you touch the metal immediately after, it is slightly warm and it is still soft, and then within seconds it becomes hard again. So the force of mind is entering into the molecular processes and modifying them from inside, even as it exerts an influence and embraces from outside. We must suppose, and if we accept that mind is outside matter, we must suppose a mental plane of existence which presses upon the physical and tends to possess it. In that case, the mental being would be in its origin an entity which is formed outside the material world. But it prepares in that world bodies which become progressively more and more able to house and express mind. We may image it forming, entering into, and possessing the body, breaking into it, as it were, as the Purusha in the Aitareya Upanishad is said to form the body and then to enter in by breaking open a door in matter. Man would, in this view, be a mental being incarnate in the living body, who at its dissolution leaves it with full possession of his mentality. So this is the inevitable chain of logic. Once we recognize that the principle of mind is guiding matter, and if mind is outside matter, then there has to be a world formed of matter itself and found of mind itself. And in that case, in that world, there would be the body of mind, which would be formed and becoming progressively more and more able to house and express mind. And this is in fact the reality which we see when we go out of the body in our subtle body, leaving behind the physical body, and we find there are planes we can traverse. There is a plane which is of the life instincts, life energies, and we go beyond that into the mental plane, and again many layers within that. And we see their beings which are mental beings. The substance of their form is substance of thought. We see there, as the mental being thinks an idea, the idea forms like a cloud emerging from the substance of the body and takes a separate form that floats away and spreads into the universe to do its thing, to execute itself, depending on what kind of clarity and energy one has put on it. Everything in the mental world is formed of substance of mental awareness. Just as everything in the life world of prana is formed of energy of life and drive of the energy instinctively pushed, just as everything in the material world is formed out of this material substance of matter. And these are all different worlds at the same time coeval, mixing into each other as if in different frequencies, right here, right now. And so if we only tune our consciousness to see in the mental world, we would see beings of mind moving around. They might not see us and we might not see them because of the difference of vibrational level. But when we tune in to be able to see them, we have as if projected a part of our consciousness in the mental world, and to that extent, they can see us. And that is why in dreams sometimes we have either beautiful dreams or nightmares where we engage in interaction with beings who are not of the material world. And these interactions can be so vivid, so intense, so concrete, that sometimes with the shock of that contact we wake up. We meet sometimes in our dreams those who have passed on, and especially in the first few months, just after they have passed on, when they're still very close to the material plane, we may enter in relation with them, see them, meet them as vividly as we would physically, and come back with a full concrete feeling of that contact still vivid in us. So there is this mental plane of existence, and the fact that it is at the same time present, passing through all these things, including the material world, it has an influence. It presses on matter. Now the question is, which came first? Did the human being first form in the mental plane and then enter into the physical plane with a physical body? Or did the physical form evolve to become more and more capable of mind, and the human mental consciousness entering into it led to the formation of mentality of a mental being in the mental plane? And the answer is very simple. Because the mental plane is formed first, even before matter appears. All things are already held there in the domain of mental possibilities. It is from the mind that there is the projection into life and into matter. So long before the material substance was sufficiently ready to house life or mind, life existed and life forms existed in the vital world, and mind forms existed in the mental world. And these are the beings and the higher domains of the mind or life that we know almost as angelic beings or Gandharvas. We have different names describing their special functions. They normally do not engage too much with the material world because they find it too dulling, too limiting. But once in a while, they're attracted to an aspiration from humanity and may choose to engage briefly to send down their inspirations, or some especially feel a kind of a compassion for humanity struggling and lean down to help and engage with human life to help and assist. But they already exist, and a large part of it is happy to live in its own domain with nothing to have to do with the material world. It is an interesting experience of many who have had frequent out-of-body experiences, that when they are wandering in the mental worlds and meet with beings there, and the beings recognize that this person is from the earth, they often look upon them with pity. Oh, you are from that domain. It's a very difficult place. Not a nice place to be in. Because the mental consciousness is so much more free, so much more spontaneous, full of light of awareness. And when you enter the body and the dullness of matter and get this pressure of limitation, it is stunning, dulling, and suffocating sometimes. So that mental plane, mind prepares in that world bodies which become progressively more and more able to house and express mind. So there can be a kind of an evolution in the mental world itself, but evolution of the mind's possibilities. And we may image it forming, entering into, and possessing the body, breaking into it, as it were. So when there is the emergence in matter of a body capable of housing mind, to whatever extent, even partially, these forms developed in the mental world would enter into, they would first preside over the formation of these bodies, guiding them by a pressure, by an imprint, and then enter into. The entry may still be partial, or they may enter fully and possess the body, forcing themselves into it, and perhaps to such a degree that they find themselves now bound, embedded, unable to free themselves, trapped as if in the material form. Because in the very entry, as the mother describes, when the soul enters the body, the nature of matter being so dull, there is a stunning effect, and the soul forgets it forgets what it was, what it is, and is so bound to the physical sensation and identification with the body that it feels, I am body, and it forgets everything else. Of course, never truly forgotten, and that is why there are deep memories, intuitions, aspirations, ideals, which are resonances of what exists already up there, which then we are driven to try to realize in the material life. This process of forming, entering, and possessing and breaking into the 4 steps that he describes is in fact what happens every time that the soul takes birth. At the first level, the soul has already formed a kind of a framework of a mental body which it is developing and perfecting across lives. And to a great extent, it retains the imprint of this mind form in itself across lives. And when it chooses to take birth, it as if unfolds, draws out from itself this mind substance, mind form, with all the capacities and tendencies that have been evolved in it. And then densifies it with mind substance taken from the mental world. And then as it moves down towards matter, further gathers substance of life force, densifying that. And at the last step, engages with and connects with the material body and enters into it. The Buddha describes that according to the evolution of the soul, this transition of entry into the material form may be either sudden at the time of birth, if the soul is not very evolved, or if it is very mature, it may preside over the formation of the body and even begin the entry process long before birth or complete the process long after birth, which is the case when we find the children being sleeping for a long time after birth, allowing gradually for a highly developed individuality to slowly enter so that the body can bear the full form of its rich development. But in such cases, the soul may preside over the formation of the fetus, putting a continuous influence on it, made up of its personality as it has already developed across lives, imprinting that tendency of consciousness. As the life forms grow, those tendencies are constantly imprinted, and it is as if it even guides the form of the body, sometimes making it quite distinctly different from the parents, or forms in it certain tendencies in the nervous system and the substance of life force, certain tendencies of its mind, of its aspiration, of its awareness developed. Even skills, if they have been integrated with the soul in previous lives, even specialized skills can be imprinted thus. And so when the child is born, already the nervous system and the mind substance is ready to express those things. The instincts right from the childhood, the instincts even in the womb are towards that direction. And in this way, the soul saves itself a huge struggle of awakening after birth. In such cases where the maturity is there and the awareness so developed, we find the children born to be unusually conscious. They even seem as if to reach out through their sight, through the contact of their eyes, complex ideas, thoughts, and feelings, which they're still unable to express because the brain is not developed. The machinery of speech and vocabulary is not so developed. But sometimes just a sound, a word, a gesture, a smile, and you can see in the eyes a very complex, mischievous thought, idea, communication. And often in such cases, the child will have a memory of that early period of childhood, late into the adult life. We know of a few such cases where the children remembered certain vivid images when they were barely 10 days old. Or in one case, a leader in the Native American tradition who described how he received his first teaching from his mother when he was about to be born. The water broke and she was living in the reservation. She had to walk 40 miles through the night over the hills and valleys to get to the hospital. And throughout she kept telling to the child, patience, patience, patience. And he remembers her telling this, and he remembers this as her first lesson. That there is a continuity of memory even from that period shows that there was already a formed mental consciousness, very much aware, able not only to enter and engage with the biology, but able also to retain the development of its consciousness without being lost in the dullness of matter. And this is possible when there is this presiding influence in the formation of the fetus. So this description is valid on several levels. It is valid in the case of a conscious soul entering. He says, the mind, we may image it forming, entering into, and possessing the body, breaking into it, as it were. This is also true in the way that humanity first emerged out of its animal origins, in the few specialized impulses of the ape mind yearning to realize something higher. There was this rising aspiration which was met by a descending mental consciousness. Beings already formed in the mental world engaged with this, connected with it, forming the ape mind and brain, entering into it, possessing the body, breaking into it, as it were, to become the early humans, and then quickly separating and the link fading away. But this is also something which happens constantly again and again in the story of evolution in all the planets. It is something which happens also in the way evolution rises at every step. There are already forms out there in the mental and vital worlds, and the physical evolution is only mirroring them, using them as a template around which to form, and then the template itself enters, merges, and joins. And Sri Aurobindo refers to the text of the Aitareya Upanishad to describe this entry process. As the Purusha in the Aitareya Upanishad is said to form the body and then to enter in by breaking open a door in matter. If Sri Aurobindo bothers to refer to this, it's worth seeing what that text has to say and in what way we can gain further insight into this. And we look at the text of the Aitareya. Sri Aurobindo has not written a commentary on it. He's only translated the 3 chapters. So unfortunately, we won't have time to go too much in detail, but in summary, it begins in the first chapter with the idea that in the beginning there was spirit. There is already pure consciousness. And the first verse goes, Hari Om. In the beginning, the spirit was one, and all this universe was the spirit. There was naught else that saw or moved. The spirit thought, lo, I will make me worlds from out of my being. So it is in the consciousness of that oneness of pure divinity, of pure self, that the world is made out of itself, in itself. And therefore this image is used in the yogic tradition of the spider weaving the web. There is the spider. Where is the web? It is made out of itself. It emerges out of itself to form this complex web. And where does the spider remain? It enters the web and plays in it as the lord, as the enjoyer, the ruler of the web. And then, when it has finished its play, it eats up the web and reabsorbs it back into itself, only to be drawn out when he so chooses. And this is the image, very symbolic, of how the divine draws out the universe out of himself into his own consciousness and withdraws into himself. Nothing has ever changed. There is only that always. The text here in the Aitareya describes then the layers by which the universe is formed. And it gives them very specific names and eventually turning towards life and matter. And then, skip verse 2, verse 3 goes, the Spirit thought, lo, these are the worlds, and now will I make me guardians for these worlds. Therefore he gathered the Purusha out of the waters and gave him shape and substance. So initially, in the second verse, you have all these layers of the waters and the light and the ethereal waters which are poured out layer by layer. These are as if distinctive grades of consciousness emerging. But on each level, on each plane of consciousness, the waters always representing in the Veda the universal consciousness, like an ocean. Out of that he forms the Purusha, the individual form, the individuality, and gave him shape and substance. So on each plane there is as if the presiding individuality, universal of course, but which presides over, rules over that whole universality. And there is at that point an individuality, but not yet of many separate. One presiding over the whole, the individuality of the whole. So the mental plane has the deity of the mental consciousness. We name him Indra. In the vital plane, similarly, the deity presiding over, and so on. Then, there is a further description of how the spirit broods over him, over the Purusha, and out of that, so many powers of consciousness are born. And then, this chapter 2, there is the hunger and thirst, which are looking for a dwelling place, and the gods which are created, all these powers which are created, they're looking for a dwelling place. And so he brings out various forms. And when he brings out man, this is verse 3 of chapter 2, he brought unto them man, and they said, oh, well fashioned truly, man indeed is well and beautifully made. Then the Spirit said unto them, enter ye in each according to his habitation. And all these powers, deities, enter now in different parts of the body. Fire became speech and entered into the mouth. Air became breath and entered into the nostrils. The sun became the sight and entered into the eyes, and so on. And the third chapter again describes how these forms lean eventually into the formation of the material world. And so, chapter 3, verse 1 goes, the Spirit thought, these verily are my worlds and their guardians, and now I will make me food for these. And food, remember, the word in Sanskrit is annam. It means matter at the same time. It's a double meaning, because the domain of matter is the domain where everything has to eat everything else, even while it is being eaten. So the annam word is a double meaning. Sri Aurobindo uses in translation only food, but we must recall it means matter, the domain of matter. And the Spirit brooded in might, the creative power, upon the waters, and from the waters brooded mightily over, form was born, and that's the material domain. Lo, all that was born as form is no other than food, matter, annam. The domain of matter is the domain of rigid, persistent form. All other planes, you have form, but the forms are fluid, not lasting. In dream, you will see, if you're reading a text. You look away and look back, the text is not the same. You must have had dreams at some point where you read the text on a page, you turn the page, and then you can't find that text anymore. Because by the time a form is there, it changes, it is fluid, it is never stable. But in matter, something which formed 1,000,000 years ago as the rock is still present, and it's hard, it hits you on the face, it reminds you that this is the domain of rigid, persistent form. And then there's a whole description of this form, food, annam, which is not able to be grasped by speech, not able to be grasped by breath, or by sight, or by hearing, etc. And finally, the downward breath is able to seize it. And this is the consciousness moving downwards into matter, getting embedded in matter. And finally, there is the text which Sri Aurobindo is referring to about the entry. Who am I then? The Spirit says. And then the verse 12 goes, it was this bound that he cleft, cleaving, breaking open like a door to enter matter. It was this bound that he cleft. It was by this door that he entered in. This that is called the gate of the cleaving. This is the door of his coming, and here is the place of his delight. He hath 3 mansions in his city, 3 dreams wherein he dwelleth, and of each in turn he saith, Lo, this is my habitation, and this is my habitation, and this is my habitation. So suggestive of the 3 bodies which form together when they unite the human being, and there is this cleaving, breaking through to enter. And there are 2 more verses which complete this chapter of the Aitareya Upanishad. We don't go further in it, but you get a sense of how the Aitareya Upanishad describes first formless spirit who moves to manifestation, creating all these layers and distinctions of gradations of consciousness, the waters, the oceans, forms within them presiding cosmic, universal powers, individualities, like archetypes of each, including the archetype of the mental consciousness. Into those, there is the awakening of those powers of the divine, which we call the gods, which are also still universal in their functions. And then comes the distinct individual form into which all these powers rush. And as they grow and develop in that form, there is the appearance of evolution. And there is the breaking in of the spirit. As the form evolves, the spirit breaks in to enter, to inhabit the form. So we read the sentence again. We may image it, mind. We may image it forming, entering into and possessing the body, breaking into it as it were, as the Purusha in the Aitareya Upanishad is said to form the body and then to enter in by breaking open a door in matter. Man would in this view be a mental being incarnate in the living body, who at its dissolution leaves it with full possession of his mentality. So when the body drops, we find ourselves in our mental form, mental consciousness, with full continuity of awareness. Now we have before us 2 theories. One is that there is this mind embedded in the force which formed matter and life and mind in the evolution. And then there is this mind which is standing outside matter, embracing, influencing, entering into matter. But it already has forms. Which of these 2? And Sri Aurobindo says, the 2 theories are far from being incompatible with each other. They can be viewed as complements, forming a single truth. For the involution of mind, its latency in the material force of the physical universe and all its movements, does not preclude the existence of a mental world beyond and above the reign of the physical principle. So he puts it negatively. It does not mean there is no contradiction. It does not mean that this prevents the other. In fact, saying it positively, we would say, mind in the mental world, having formed all the possibilities that mind could play with, it then limits itself through life into matter through an involution, and therefore the principle of mind is hidden in the force of matter. But it came from this domain, and therefore this as a domain of mind and the other as mind embedded in matter as a principle are actually continuities, two facets of a single whole truth. In fact, he says, the emergence of such a latent mind might well depend upon and would certainly profit by the aid and pressure of forces from a supra-physical kingdom, a mental plane of existence. So it might even depend upon that already being present for it to emerge. When the ape mind is trying to become self-aware, form individuality of mental consciousness, develop the full power of rationality, it struggles because the form is unable to express it. Mother made a comment once. She said she enjoyed very much to look at pictures of monkeys more than look at pictures of human beings. Because she said in monkeys, there is constantly this sense of straining to realize mind, this sense that it is possible, and they're struggling always to express the mind powers, but they can't, but they try. Whereas in humanity, people don't even bother to develop their mind, they don't even struggle to grow beyond what little dim mentality they have, and certainly not for spirituality. So this self-satisfied condition of humanity she found not very nice. In contrast, the monkeys were much more representative of an aspiration to grow. But this we see every time a monkey engages with human beings. We see this also in very developed dogs and other individualized animals. When they interact with human beings, they're struggling to understand the human mind and the human speech and the human capacity to see beyond with logic. They try to capture that, they try to absorb that. And sometimes when they have had close contact with human beings, it is as if there is a kind of an osmosis. A part of the human consciousness flows into the dog, the cat, or the monkey, and forms in it the tendencies of the human mind. And we find those creatures becoming almost human in their intelligence, except that they cannot yet speak. And it is through such a process that the soul evolving in that animal body is prepared to take birth in human form. So you can see how in the transition to human consciousness, the help of an already existent human being or mental being is so useful. We see it in animals, but it would be also in the ape when the first human transition had to take place. And it is true in human beings even today. When we push our mind's capacity to grow beyond its current limitations, because there are already existent forms and beings of that higher consciousness, their existence and their influence on us assists this transition. In fact, this principle is used powerfully in the integral yoga, where our goal is not just to push the limits of the mind, but to transcend the mind itself, to go to something much greater through layers of higher mind and intuition towards even the supermind. And in this case, what is the being whose influence is going to help? And for us, that is the divine himself, the divine in his power to manifest as the divine mother. And we open our mind, open our heart, open our life, even down to the body, substance, the nerves, at the cellular level eventually, to her light, her power, her love, that she may fill our mind, our heart, and our life with herself. And in so doing, she forms the mind, she forms the heart, she transmutes and transforms even our body, forming, entering, and possessing. And it is this descent of the divine consciousness in us which can most effectively, most rapidly, and most smoothly transform and awaken in us these higher gradations of consciousness. So, this principle is operating across all the planes. But right now, we're looking at the influence of the mind in evolution. In fact, the emergence of such a latent mind might well depend upon and would certainly profit by the aid and pressure of forces from a supra-physical kingdom, a mental plane of existence. In the occult history of the earth, in the theosophical literature, you will find descriptions where they say the earliest human beings were non-material. They were in fact in subtle mental bodies, but living on the earth, able to engage with the material domain to a certain degree. And subsequently, there was a densification, descent of the consciousness, embedding itself more and more into the material vibration until eventually, at the last step, they got blocked, they got sucked into matter and got locked into it, unable to free from. And that is the origin of our present humanity. And you can see how this is not incompatible with the idea of an evolution of form also. There's a point where the two meet and there's a joining and a breakthrough. So now we have two different approaches to the whole picture of the universe. There is this Vedic idea of a mind plane, and the mind is a principle even entering matter, guiding the emergence in matter of life and mind. And then there is the modern scientific idea that mind and life are only products of physical processes. And he puts these two together. There are always two possible views of the universe. The one supposes, with modern science, matter to be the beginning of things and studies everything as an evolution from matter. Or if not matter, then with the Sankhya philosophy, an indeterminate, inconscient, active force or prakriti, of which even mind and reason are mechanical operations. The conscious soul, if any, exists being a quite different and although conscient yet inactive entity. This is the Sankhya philosophy. We will see it later in detail. The other, this is the Vedic view, the other supposes the conscious soul, the Purusha, to be the material as well as the cause of the universe, and Prakriti to be only its Shakti, or the force of its conscious being, which operates upon itself as the material of forms. The latter is the view of the Upanishads. But how do you resolve these two things? How can there be two different views? In Sri Aurobindo's vision, you can never have ultimately a contradiction. There is only one fundamental truth, of which all truths are facets. How do you place this contradictory truth of science against this larger truth of the Vedic and Upanishadic view? And he now shows how the two are related. The view of science you can get by reducing this into that. If you remove from this larger truth certain elements, you end up with the view of science. And he says, certainly, if we study the material world only, so we bring our focus only on matter, we don't look at mind or life, excluding all evidence of other planes as a dream or a hallucination. So any experience you have of out-of-body experience or dream worlds, precognition, you say, oh, that's hallucination. You cut it out deliberately. We must necessarily, excluding all evidence of other planes as a dream or hallucination, if we equally exclude all evidence of operations in mind which exceed the material limitation and study only its ordinary equation with matter. So we have examples of genius where the mind is able to perceive things bypassing logic, see things at a distance, sense things which are imminent, etc., and which we are able to find as functions existing in all human beings. And a lot of these parapsychological tests are found to be effective on every human being in smaller or greater capacity. So we eliminate all this also. Then we must necessarily accept the theory of matter as the origin and as the indispensable basis and continent. So if we remove this, we remove that, and we remove the other, then of course we have only matter as the origin. So you see how the two theories are related. The materialist scientific theory is a subset when you eliminate all the evidence successively and choose consciously to focus only on this limited view and say, well, this is all because that's all I choose to see. Otherwise, we shall be irresistibly led towards the early Vedantic conclusions. If we accept any of these three things which we have eliminated, we will come back to the larger view. What these are and how it works, we will see next time. This whole paragraph we must study a little more deeply, and we will see examples of what are the functions in our mind, in our life, even in ordinary life, which point to the reality of these higher planes, and eventually, subsequently in this chapter, the inevitability of a supermind, because mind cannot exhaust all the possibilities of consciousness. There has to be a different, higher faculty, and with it, a higher cognition, a power of cognition, which is mind of our mind. This will be the discussion which we will take up the Sunday after 2 weeks. So that will be on the 22nd of November. We can meditate on this briefly and this grand vision, where very simply, logically, but also resonating with deep truths within us, Sri Aurobindo shows us the continuity of all these planes and the influence of mind on life and matter.